Hi, everyone, and welcome to McAfee Answers. I'm Christy Crimmins, and today we'll be answering how to use the dark web to protect your digital privacy. This is a two-part series, and in the first part, we talked about and answered what are the dangers of the dark web and how can I better protect myself. And you can find that session on the McAfee Support YouTube channel. If you have questions during this webcast, just click the Q&A button at the bottom right of the screen and submit it there, and we'll answer it at the end. And here to talk about the dark web and digital privacy is Senior Vice President and CTO of McAfee, Steve Grobman. Thanks for being with us today, Steve.
Hey, thanks so much, Christy. It's great to have this discussion with our customer base because privacy and the dark web are two topics that seem to come up a lot in conversation, but what they really are, what they really mean, is something that really people aren't that familiar with. So hopefully we'll be able to debunk some myths and give a little bit of insight into what these things are. So I want to kick us off and just talk about privacy in general as it relates to the webs. And so I'm saying the webs on purpose, meaning that as we talked about in part one, there are different parts of the web. There's the surface web, which is all of the public information. There's the deep web, which is usually when you need to sign into a site. So your bank, if you are editing medical records online or having a consultation with your doctor, that would all be the deep web. And then the dark web is the part of the web that uses different protocols and is generally not seen. Regardless of which of these webs you're using, you want your information to be private. But what does that really mean? The very term privacy is a confusing term, and I wanted to spend the bulk of today really digging into what is digital privacy and what can various parties see when you're using the web. So when we decompose privacy, it all comes down to protecting certain types of information from certain organizations and having them not be able to see specific information. So I think of this as you're preventing who from seeing what. So in this case, we're going to talk about two types of organizations that are the who. So first off, you would have your local network. So think of this as wherever you are using your device. This could be a coffee shop. It could be an airport. It could be your house. Whoever is running the network that you're connecting to with your device clearly is going to be able to see some information because you're taking advantage of their network. There's also all of the infrastructure providers beyond that. So ultimately, the coffee shop is going to be utilizing internet services from large telecommunication companies. There's internet backbone providers. It's all of that infrastructure that routes the information. Part of what we're going to be talking about is guarding certain types of information from those entities. But then there's also the actual site or service that you're visiting. In the case of going to a website, you might want to buy a product, but the nature of the product might be something that you don't want for the rest of your life, having pop-up ads appear on your various feeds for whatever it is you're shopping for. In this case, we used as an example, you're shopping for toenail fungus cures. You might not want that to be popping up for the rest of your life. But there's a bit of nuance here in that these different organizations and entities, we need to guard or prevent different types of information from them, and they're a little different. So first and foremost, the content of your communication. So when you're using a website, you're typing in information and you don't want the coffee shop or the airport or possibly whoever's running your home network to see that. So if you're going to the IRS website and typing in your social security number, you don't want the coffee shop to be able to see your social security number. So we want to protect that. But if you look at the right column, like clearly the actual service provider that's running the site needs to see what you're typing in, or else their site wouldn't work. Similarly, it's not just the content, but even what sites are you visiting? So the fact that you're clicking on a link that goes to the Mayo Clinic in order to research some specific disease that you're trying to understand better, like that's no business of the coffee shop, the airport, the school. Uh, that's something that you'd want to keep secure. But again, the site itself knows what site that you're going to because they need to provide that capability. But the inverse is true when you talk about your information. So your IP address or your network address, your location, those are things that when you're sitting in the coffee shop, like they know you're sitting in the coffee shop, so you can't really prevent them from knowing that. But you might not want the website or the service that you're going to know anything about you. So when we talk through this notion of digital privacy, we're going to actually walk through these three different types of privacy and how we're going to use various techniques to guard against the appropriate organization from being able to see them. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is how do we actually prevent your internet service provider, the place that you're connecting from seeing the content of your communication? The good news is that's one of the simplest, and that's something you can do with just a standard browser. So you've heard security professionals tell you for years that you should always surf using what's called HTTPS or TLS or SSL or SSH. All of these are various terms used for essentially saying that your communication to a specific site is encrypted. And the way that this would typically appear for a user is on your browser, you'll have either a lock or a key right in the address bar, and that tells you that the connection is secure. One of the things that we wanted to do in this webinar is actually show you what would happen if that coffee shop was an evil coffee shop. Let's say the coffee shop was recording all of the network traffic that was coming from your device going to the IRS while you're trying to pay your taxes online while drinking a cup of coffee. And they can absolutely do this. So the ability for a network provider to intercept the actual bytes that are going from your computer to the end website is something very easy to do. And what you're seeing here is a screenshot of one of the tools that can be used to do this. If they look at that data and you're going to this IRS, in this case, website, all they see is what looks like garbage, mixed up characters. It's all what we call encrypted traffic, where the only thing that can decode what you're doing on the IRS website is your own computer and the IRS. So the good news is for that very first line in our chart, all you need is a high quality browser, whether it's Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome, Apple Safari. All of these provide high quality implementations of HTTPS that you can use to protect somebody that is in the middle of providing you network services from seeing the content of what you're doing. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, that's not the only thing that you need to worry about. You might not want them to know that you're going to the IRS or that you're going to a particular website. So, can they actually see what website you're going to, even if they can't see what you're doing on the website? And the answer to that is yes. So, if you replay our scenario, and in this case, I've chosen a different website, which is www.namborg.com. And if you wanted to go to that website, but not have the coffee shop know that you went to that website, you're going to have to do a few additional things. But first, Let's take a look at how that evil coffee shop could detect that you went there. There's two ways they can do that. One of the things that the current internet utilizes for most devices is something called domain name services. This is basically the technology that allows you to look up something that is friendly to humans, like a domain name. So www.mcafee.com or irs.gov or namborg.com. And the DNS capability converts that to a network address, basically the telephone number that allows your computer to actually make the network connection. The problem is when DNS first was invented many decades ago, it was never envisioned to be used in all of these scenarios that it's used today. So what you're looking up is actually in plain text. And if you intercept the traffic, you can see the domain. So in this case, we can actually see that I've queried what is the IP address for www.namborg.com, even though I'm going there using a secure network connection. There's another part of these various communication protocols that also exposes the name of the domain that you're going to, and it's actually part of the HTTPS protocol. One of the things that was engineered very early on in creation of the secure protocols for the web is there was a challenge that many websites might utilize the same IP address. So there was this need to be able to see which website was actually the one that was involved in a transaction. So while all of the content is encrypted when you connect to something with a secure web connection, the actual name of the server is exposed. So what do you do about it? There are three ways that you can help guard your privacy if you don't want that evil coffee shop or the airport that you happen to be sitting in, or the school or your house to see where you're going. One, as we mentioned in the previous webcast, you can use the Tor browser that provides some uh, privacy capabilities. You can utilize a consumer VPN. McAfee has a VPN built in to its core consumer offering. We also have a standalone version of VPN that's under the TunnelBear brand. And there are existing evolutions to those internet protocols that we use today that will address some of these even without these specialized tools. They won't resolve the issues completely, but there are next generation versions of DNS that will not expose where you're trying to go to those entities that happen to be in the middle of the communication. And similarly, there's a new set of standards related to secure web protocols that will also help solve this problem. So what does it look like if you were to use a Tor browser and you went to that same website? Well, what it does is, number one, it doesn't expose the DNS request for where you're trying to go. So that just disappears altogether. And even though it utilizes the same secure web protocol that your standard browser uses, it does some trickery where it'll actually create just a garbage domain name that allows it to connect to the next hop, and the underlying website is not visible to either your internet service provider or any of those places that you might be connecting to locally. So this is essentially what the evil coffee shop would see if you're using a Tor browser to go to that same website. And you can see on the left how Tor works. It's bouncing you around. It's taking you to Poland, then Germany again, and then back to the US. So what about that last row? So we talked about using Tor, or we can use a VPN to protect the ability to see where you're going. But what about the website itself? What information can it see? And we wanted to show you what a typical website log looks like from their standpoint. Uh, Christy and I, a few weeks ago, we went out for lunch and we went to a restaurant in the colony, and we connected to their network, and we accessed a website that we had access to its logs on, and we wanted to show what does the website operator see. And this is a screenshot of a few of the log entries from that website. One of the things that you will see in the web log is the IP address of where that connection is coming from. Once you have that IP address, you can do a reverse lookup to get all sorts of information. So we can see who actually owns that address. In this case, it's part of the Grand Communication Network internet service provider. We can see the latitude, longitude that's pretty close to where we were actually eating. So, this might, if this is exposing the hometown that you live in, this might not be something that you would want to expose to a website that you're going to research information. So what if we use the Tor browser? Now, remember, I mentioned that it bounces you around. I think of this almost like a spy movie, where the criminal is routing their phone call, bouncing off of different sites in different cities around the world, and the police are trying to chase it. It just went to Poland, and now Germany, and now France, and now back to the U.S., and now we got him. Well, that's essentially what Tor does, is it bounces you all around. So what the website is going to see is that last hop of what that final connection is. And there's no real way for the website to easily identify what the actual location for the user is. So we did the same experiment where we accessed the same website from a Tor browser, and this is what it looks like. So now, even though we were sitting in a suburb of Dallas having lunch, from the web server's perspective, it looks like we're coming from Toulouse, France. And all of the logs basically say that we're coming from Toulouse, France. The Tor browser has some interesting capabilities that every website you go to will actually appear to come from a different location. So it's very easy to use, and that's why it's not showing Germany in this case, because on our next connection, it went to somewhere else. So why don't we do this for everything? Part of the reason is a lot of websites, knowing where you're really coming from can help give you a better experience. So for example, when you go to Google, when you're using the Tor browser, it thinks you're coming from France or Germany or Finland or Japan, and it will, for your benefit, present all of the pages in that local language, which can be really difficult if you don't speak that language. And while you can generally go to websites and say revert to your native language, it does make things challenging. Also, all of this bouncing around the world slows things down. So when speed matters, using an anonymizing capability like Tor is going to slow you down a lot. It's one of the reasons that a consumer VPN like McAfee's VPN can help resolve these issues, where you can connect within your home country, still getting the anonymity. They'll just know you're coming from somewhere in the United States that isn't necessarily related to where you are, assuming you live in the US, but it'll still present things in a natural language. And because it isn't taking all of these hops, it's going to operate much faster. So that's the quick overview. And I'd now like to open it up for questions and answers.
Thanks, Steve. Just really interesting stuff, and I do have to say that was the quickest trip to France I've taken in ever. So, and then just as a reminder to everybody, you can ask your questions via the Q&A box that on the right-hand side. Just click submit, and we will get through those. We did have some questions come in while you're presenting, so we're going to start with those. The first one is, isn't the dark web dangerous? How can I ensure my safety and the safety of my information? And how do I get a Tor? How do I download a Tor browser?
Sure. So there's a few parts to the answer. The dark web in and of itself isn't dangerous. There are many legitimate sites that are perfectly safe. For example, many of the high quality journal newspapers have sites on the dark web to submit anonymous stories or tips. So the Washington Post, the New York Times, all have a presence on the dark web, as does certain government agencies to provide crime tips and things of that nature. But dark web sites do offer anonymity to the server, so naturally, there is more insidious and dangerous sites that exist on the dark web. So there are dangerous sites on the surface web. There are dangerous sites on the dark web. There's a higher percentage of malicious sites on the dark web, but the dark web isn't necessarily dangerous in and of itself. Also, you should note that the Tor browser isn't just for surfing the dark web. What I demonstrated today was using the Tor browser, and you can go to Google, you can go to your favorite news site, and it'll anonymize you when you go to those sites on the standard, what we call surface or deep web. So you do need to be extra careful if you're using those dark web only sites, but it's not inherently dangerous. And the one thing I would recommend is you download the Tor browser from the actual Tor website itself, and we can post a link to that.
Okay. Are there any ways to be anonymous without using the Tor browser?
Sure. So one of the things that I mentioned is a VPN is a great way for most users to get very strong anonymity without having to worry about some of the possible dangers of stumbling onto the dark web. One of the really nice things about a VPN, and you can get a VPN from McAfee if you're a McAfee customer. It's generally included in most subscriptions, or there's a standalone TunnelBear VPN. It will create this anonymity for everything that's on your device, not just the browser. So, for example, if you're on a mobile device and you're using an app, the same types of anonymity that we're able to apply to browsers will also apply to those apps. So there's a few additional benefits. And from a user experience, it's much simpler and you're getting the technology from a well-respected security trusted partner, in this case, McAfee.
Interesting. So we've talked a lot about how to maintain privacy on your desktop computer. But is there, a lot of us are always on our phones, as you're probably well aware. Is there a way to surf anonymously on my mobile phone or a way to be anonymous on my phone?
So there are variants of the Tor browser for most platforms, but the easiest way to get anonymity and higher levels of privacy on mobile devices is using a VPN. So there's a native Android and iOS client for our VPN stack, and that will provide the anonymity that most consumers need.
Okay, great. Well, that's really all we have time for today, but it was a really interesting discussion. Thank you for sharing your time with us, Steve. It's always interesting when we have these conversations with you. And thanks for answering some of our questions.
Great, Christy.
Um,
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And until next time, please stay safe, everybody.